Imagine this. A pregnant woman walks into a charity gala only to be humiliated by her powerful ex-husband in front of hundreds of guests. He calls her a nobody, but what happens next will flip the entire room upside down. Because standing in the crowd that night was a man no one expected, a billionaire with a secret of his own. Stay with me, because the twist you're about to hear is one of the most shocking revenge stories you'll ever see. And if you love stories where the underdog turns the tables and wins in the most unforgettable way, don't forget to hit like, drop a comment, share this with a friend, and subscribe so you don't miss the next jaw-dropping drama. The crystal chandeliers of the St. Jude's Charity Gala cast golden light across 500 of New York's elite. But Rachel Morrison felt only the harsh spotlight of humiliation burning into her skin. 7 months pregnant, she stood frozen in her borrowed black dress as her ex-husband's voice carried across the ballroom like a whip crack. "That's just Rachel," Greg Shaw announced, his Senate candidate's smile never wavering as he pointed directly at her swollen belly. "She used to be somebody's wife. Now she's nobody, and apparently nobody's problem." The silence that followed was deafening. Rachel heard the blood rushing in her ears, felt the weight of 500 pairs of eyes, saw the camera phones lifting like weapons. Her hand instinctively moved to protect her unborn daughter, the child Greg knew perfectly well was his. "Greg," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper, "please don't do this here." But Greg had already turned away, his arm around Bianca Whitfield's wasp-thin waist. The former Miss Texas threw Rachel a triumphant smirk, her diamond earrings catching the light, the same earrings Rachel had received for their 5th anniversary. Rachel had been somebody once, a successful corporate lawyer who'd made partner track at 30. She'd given it all up for Greg's political dreams, playing the perfect supporter's wife while he climbed toward the Senate. 2 miscarriages had nearly broken her. When he'd left her for his campaign manager 8 months ago, she'd thought that was rock bottom. She was wrong. The pregnancy had been her last hope, frozen embryos from happier times, used with Greg's written consent before the divorce. Except Greg had never filed those final papers. Legally, they were still married, though he paraded Bianca around like a fiancé and left Rachel drowning in legal fees from frivolous lawsuits. Mrs. Morrison, a man in a severe black suit, appeared at her elbow. "You've been served." The legal documents he pressed into her trembling hands claimed she'd forged Greg's consent for the IVF. The accusation was as false as Greg's campaign promises, but the damage was done. Her boss, Harold Winters, materialized beside her, his face flushed with embarrassment. "Rachel," Harold said quietly, "I'm sorry, but this is too much. You're supposed to be coordinating this event, not becoming the spectacle. Clear out your desk Monday." "Harold, please, I need this job." "I'm sorry." He walked away without looking back. Rachel's phone buzzed. An Instagram notification. Bianca had already posted a video of the entire scene with crying, laughing emojis. The caption read, "When the ex shows up uninvited, desperate much?" The room spun. Rachel stumbled toward the service entrance, needing air, needing escape, needing to wake up from this nightmare. In the kitchen, she collapsed against the wall, trying to catch her breath. "Rough night?" A voice made her jump. A young man in an expensive suit leaned against the prep counter, all sympathy and white teeth. "Mark Collins," he said, extending his hand. "I'm a lawyer. Saw what happened out there. Absolutely shameful." Rachel hesitated, then shook his hand. "Rachel Morrison." "I know who you are," Mark said gently. "Look, I do pro bono work for women in your situation. Greg Shaw is a bully, and what he's doing to you, especially while you're pregnant, it's unconscionable." "Why would you help me?" Rachel asked, her legal training making her suspicious even through her desperation. "Because it's the right thing to do," Mark said. "Let me buy you a coffee. We can discuss your options." Something made Rachel reach into her purse and activate the voice recorder app on her phone before following him to the small break room. Her paranoia had kept her alive this long in Greg's war against her. She wasn't about to stop now. The fluorescent lights in the kitchen break room flickered as Mark poured coffee from a pot that had been sitting too long. Rachel accepted the cup but didn't drink, her instincts screaming warnings. "So," Mark said, settling into a metal folding chair with practiced ease, "tell me about the IVF. Did Greg really consent?" "He signed the papers himself," Rachel said carefully. "His signature is notarized. I have copies in my safety deposit box. Mark's eyebrows rose. Smart. But Greg's claiming emotional duress, that you manipulated him while he was vulnerable after his father's death. His father died 3 years ago. The IVF consent was signed 18 months ago. Still, Mark pressed, leaning forward, you were having marital problems. Some might say you got pregnant to trap him. Rachel's hand tightened on her coffee cup. We'd been trying for 5 years. I had 2 miscarriages. The embryos were created during our marriage. I used them because my doctor said it might be my last chance. At 34? Seems dramatic. Endometriosis doesn't care about age, Rachel said flatly. But you know that already, don't you? You've seen my medical records. Mark's friendly mask slipped for just a second. I'm trying to help you, Rachel. Are you? Rachel set down her untouched coffee. Or are you here to get me to say something Greg can use against me? Mark laughed, but it sounded forced. You're paranoid. Am I? Then you won't mind if I ask which firm you work for? I'm independent. Really? So if I called the New York Bar Association right now, they wouldn't tell me you work for Harriman, Locke and Associates? Greg's law firm? The color drained from Mark's face. He recovered quickly, but not quickly enough. Fine, he said, his nice guy act evaporating like morning mist. You got me. But here's the thing, Rachel. I'm recording this entire conversation. And you just admitted to using those embryos knowing your marriage was failing. That's emotional instability. Unfitness for motherhood. Rachel stood slowly, her hand moving to her belly. Are you sure you're the only one recording? She pulled out her phone, showing him the recording app's glowing red button. Mark lunged for it, but Rachel was already backing toward the door. That's illegal, Mark sputtered. New York is a one-party consent state, Rachel said calmly. I can record any conversation I'm part of. You just admitted to conspiracy to defraud and intentional infliction of emotional distress on a pregnant woman. Would you like to continue this discussion, or should I send this to the state bar now? Mark's face turned an alarming shade of purple. You're nobody. Greg owns this city. You think one recording will matter? Maybe not, Rachel said, but it's a start. She left him standing there, mouth gaping like a landed fish. Outside, the November air bit at her face, but she barely felt it. Her phone was already ringing, unknown numbers, probably reporters who'd seen Bianca's video. She declined them all and ordered an Uber with her last $40. The Brooklyn apartment she'd called home for 6 months was owned by one of Greg's donors, a detail she'd discovered too late. The eviction notice was probably already waiting for her. Her credit cards had been frozen last week. Greg's banking connections at work. She had $300 in cash, a car worth maybe $2,000, and a baby coming in 8 weeks. The Uber driver kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror. You okay, miss? Fine, Rachel lied. You sure? You're crying. Rachel touched her face. She hadn't realized. It's been a long night. Tell me about it. My wife's pregnant too. 7 months. You? Same. First one? Rachel thought of the 2 she'd lost. The tiny grave markers Greg hadn't even attended the services for. Yes. It gets better, the driver said kindly. Whatever you're going through, it gets better. My mama used to say, when you hit rock bottom, at least you know which way is up. Rachel wanted to believe him, but as they pulled up to her building and she saw the yellow eviction notice taped to her door, she realized she hadn't hit rock bottom yet. She was still falling. 48 hours. That's all the time the eviction notice gave her. Rachel stood in her cramped studio apartment, surrounded by boxes she couldn't afford to move, and a life she could barely recognize as her own. The morning sun streaming through the window seemed to mock her desperation. Her phone buzzed with another notification. Bianca had posted a photo wearing a massive diamond ring. Fake, Rachel knew, because Greg was too calculating to buy real jewelry before the divorce was final. The caption read, "Future senator's wife. He proposed last night. Sometimes good things come to those who wait for losers to get out of the way." Rachel's lawyer, or rather her former lawyer, since she couldn't pay him anymore, had called 6 times. She finally answered on the 7th. Rachel, thank God, David Stern said. I've been served with papers. Greg's team is filing for emergency custody based on your mental instability and lack of stable housing. They know about the eviction. Of course they do, Rachel said numbly. They orchestrated it. There's more. They're claiming you assaulted Mark Collins last night. He says you threatened him. I have a recording that proves otherwise. It won't matter if you don't have a lawyer to present it. Rachel, I'm sorry, but without payment, I can't. I understand, Rachel cut him off. Thank you for everything, David. She hung up and looked around the apartment. Her law degree hung crooked on the wall, a relic from her somebody days. Her wedding album peeked out from a half-packed box, photos of her and Greg smiling at a future that had turned to ash. The baby kicked hard, as if protesting the injustice of it all. I know, sweetheart, Rachel whispered. Mommy's trying. She'd already sold everything valuable. Her engagement ring had gone first, then her jewelry, her designer clothes, even her good laptop. All that remained was her ancient Honda Civic and whatever she could fit inside it. By sunset, Rachel sat in that Civic in a 24-hour diner parking lot, her entire life packed in the back seat. She had $170 left after gas. The diner's neon sign promised best coffee in Brooklyn, which was a lie, but at least it was warm inside. She ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, toast and coffee, and opened her laptop to search for jobs. Every law firm she'd worked with knew Greg. Every event planning company had heard about the gala disaster. Her inbox was full of rejections and one message from her mother in California. Gregory called, he's worried about you. Maybe you should just give him what he wants. Even her own mother thought she was nobody now. Rough night? A voice asked. Rachel looked up to find a man sliding into the booth across from her. He wore faded jeans and a plain gray sweater, utterly unremarkable except for his eyes. They were the warm brown of expensive whiskey, and they held a kindness that made her want to cry. I'm sorry, she said quickly. I'm not hitting on you, he said, gestured to her pregnant belly with a gentle smile. You just look like you could use a friend. I'm Leo. Rachel. He had a book with him, Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. Heavy reading for a diner, she observed. Helps me remember that we can't control what happens to us, only how we respond, Leo said. Though I'm guessing you don't want philosophy right now. Right now I want a job and a place to live that isn't my car. Leo studied her for a moment. What kind of work? I was a lawyer. Corporate contracts mostly, then event planning, now apparently nothing since I'm unemployable in this city. Because of Greg Shaw? Rachel's eyes widened. You know who I am? I saw Bianca's video. Cruel thing to do to anyone, especially a pregnant woman. He paused. I run a startup. We need someone to handle our legal compliance documentation. It's boring work, but it pays well, and you can do it remotely. Interested? You don't even know me. I know you're tough enough to be 7 months pregnant and sleeping in your car without giving up. That's worth something. Rachel's coffee cup rattled as she set it down, her hand shaking. Why would you help me? Because someone should, Leo said simply. My wife died 3 years ago. Car accident. She was pregnant. Nobody helped her either. The pain in his voice was so raw, so real that Rachel believed him. I'm sorry, she whispered. Don't be sorry. Just say yes to the job. He pulled out a business card. Can you start tomorrow? The pay is $6,000 a month, health insurance included. It was more than she'd made event planning. This is real? As real as that baby kicking you right now, he said, noticing her wince. Rachel took the card. Leonard Conway, it read. Conway Technical Solutions. The office building wasn't what Rachel expected. Instead of some rundown startup space in Brooklyn, Conway Technical Solutions occupied the entire 40th floor of a Manhattan high-rise on Park Avenue. The building's marble lobby gleamed with the kind of wealth that whispered rather than shouted. The security guards simply nodded at Leo and waved them through to the executive elevators. This is a startup? Rachel asked as the elevator climbed silently skyward. 5 years old, Leo said, adjusting his unremarkable sweater, though now Rachel noticed the fabric was cashmere, the kind that cost more than her former monthly car payment. We're in stealth mode, preparing for a major product launch. That's why you haven't heard of us. The elevator opened directly into a reception area that took Rachel's breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed Central Park like a living painting. The space was minimalist but expensive. Real hardwood floors, designer furniture that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries, and art that looked suspiciously like originals. "Where is everyone?" Rachel asked, noticing the profound quiet. "Most of our team works remotely. We keep the space for client meetings and collaboration sessions." Leo led her through the pristine hallways, their footsteps echoing. "The development team is in Singapore this week. The AI division works from Tokyo. We coordinate across time zones." He opened a door to a corner office that made Rachel stop in her tracks. It was bigger than her former apartment, with a massive ergonomic desk, a sitting area with a leather couch, and a private bathroom. The view stretched from Central Park to the Hudson River. "Leo, this is too much." "It's practical," he said, his tone matter-of-fact. "You need stability for your health and the baby. The couch pulls out into a bed if you need to rest. The bathroom is obvious. Pregnancy and long commutes don't mix well. There's a kitchen down the hall, always stocked. Doctor's orders override work." Always. Rachel ran her hand along the desk's smooth surface. "What exactly does Conway Technical Solutions do?" "We solve problems," Leo said simply. "Encryption, data protection, secure communications. Boring but necessary." Over the next week, Rachel discovered that Conway Technical Solutions was anything but simple. The company held 47 patents for revolutionary encryption technology that made current cybersecurity look like tissue paper. Military contracts with code names she couldn't pronounce. Fortune 500 clients who paid millions for protection against threats Rachel hadn't known existed. She found herself handling contracts for technology that seemed pulled from science fiction. Quantum encryption protocols, AI-driven threat detection, something called ghost networking that made data literally invisible to hackers. "You lied to me," she confronted Leo one afternoon, holding up a contract worth $80 million. "I simplified," he corrected, not looking up from the code he was reviewing on 3 different monitors simultaneously. "Would you have taken the job if I'd told you the truth?" "What truth? Who are you really?" Leo's fingers stilled on the keyboard. He turned to her, and for the first time she saw exhaustion in those whiskey-brown eyes. "Someone who understands what it's like to lose everything that matters. The details don't change that." Rachel wanted to push, but Emma kicked hard, making her gasp. Leo was beside her instantly, guiding her to the couch. "Braxton Hicks?" he asked with the confidence of someone who knew about pregnancy. "I think so," Rachel breathed through the discomfort. "My wife had them constantly in her 3rd trimester," Leo said quietly, then caught himself, pain flashing across his features. "Tell me about her," Rachel said softly. Leo sat beside her, maintaining professional distance, but close enough that she could smell his cologne, something subtle and expensive. Anna was brilliant, a neurosurgeon at Mount Sinai. She could remove brain tumors the size of golf balls through incisions you'd need a magnifying glass to see. His voice grew warm with memory. "She was 8 months pregnant when—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "The other driver was going 90 in a 30 zone. The police said he was drunk, but the toxicology came back clean. It took me 6 months to find out he'd been paid. Another year to trace the payment to offshore accounts connected to a competitor who wanted me out of the way." "Leo, I'm so sorry." "The police couldn't prove it. Money buried the truth. The driver got 18 months for vehicular manslaughter. He's already out." Rachel's legal mind reeled. "That's impossible. The sentence guidelines don't apply when judges are bought," Leo finished bitterly. "That's when I learned that justice is just a word unless you have the power to enforce it." They sat in silence, 2 broken people sharing space without demanding anything from each other. Rachel felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Understood. "You remind me that strength isn't about never falling," Leo said eventually. "It's about getting up when everyone's watching you fail," Rachel finished. He smiled, the expression transforming his face from ordinary to striking. "Exactly." As days turned into a week, Rachel found herself looking forward to work despite everything. Leo was brilliant, genuinely genius-level intelligent. He could discuss contract law as easily as quantum computing, philosophy as readily as financial derivatives. He brought her fresh fruit when she forgot to eat, insisted she leave early when she looked tired, adjusted the office temperature when she was uncomfortable, all without making her feel weak or incapable. He never asked about Greg beyond what was necessary for her legal situation, never pressed about the baby's father, never made her feel like nobody. "I've assigned you a company credit card," Leo announced one morning, sliding the Black American Express across her desk. "For business expenses." "Leo, I can't. You're driving an hour from Brooklyn in a car that sounds like it's dying. That's a liability for the company. Use it for gas repairs. Whatever you need to get here safely." Rachel stared at the card. "This is charity. This is practicality. I need my legal compliance officer functional, not stranded on the FDR drive." That afternoon, her phone exploded with notifications. Greg had found out about her new job. His lawyer called 6 times before she answered. "Ms. Morrison," the lawyer said coldly, "Mr. Shaw is concerned about your new employment. Working for a competitor could violate your non-compete agreement." "I was an event planner, not a tech executive," Rachel shot back. "And Leo Conway isn't Greg's competitor. Greg isn't smart enough to compete in this space." She hung up, hands shaking. Within minutes, a process server appeared in the lobby. The security guard called up, and Leo answered. "Send them away," Leo said calmly. "This is private property. They can leave any documents with building security." But Greg wasn't done. The emergency custody hearing was scheduled for the next week, claiming Rachel's unstable employment situation and association with questionable individuals made her unfit. "I have to go," Rachel told Leo, showing him the papers. "You have a lawyer?" "I have myself." "Rachel, you can't represent yourself in family court while 7 months pregnant against Greg's entire legal team." "I don't have a choice." Leo made a call. 20 minutes later, Miranda Campbell walked into Rachel's office. She was tiny but radiated the kind of power that made grown men nervous. Her suit probably cost more than Rachel's car, and her reputation was worth more than most people's houses. "Leo asked me to help," Miranda said simply. "Pro bono. I don't like bullies, especially ones who target pregnant women." Rachel looked between them. "Leo, I can't accept," I said. "You can and you will," he said firmly. "Greg wants to call you nobody. Let's show him how wrong he is." "Why do you care so much?" Rachel asked, tears threatening. Leo met her eyes. "Because everyone deserves to be somebody to someone. And right now, you're somebody to me. A valuable employee, a brilliant legal mind, and a friend. Let me help you." The hearing was scheduled for Friday. Rachel spent the week preparing with Miranda, who was ruthless in her preparation. "Greg will claim you're unstable. We need to show you're thriving. New job, stable income, good health care. Leo's company is your ace card. It's respectable, successful, and Leo's reputation is impeccable." "What reputation? He's invisible online." Miranda smiled mysteriously. "That's what makes him powerful. He doesn't need to be seen to matter." The night before the hearing, Rachel worked late, trying to distract herself. Leo brought Chinese food, and they ate in her office, papers spread between them. "You're going to win tomorrow," he said with quiet confidence. "How can you be sure?" "Because you're fighting for your daughter. Greg's fighting for his ego. Love beats pride every time." Rachel wanted to believe him. As they sat there, city lights twinkling below, she felt something dangerous. Hope. Not just for tomorrow's hearing, but for a future that might include someone who saw her as somebody worth fighting beside. The hearing was a massacre, in Rachel's favor. Judge Patricia Hoffman, a silver-haired woman with eyes like steel, had not been amused by Greg's latest stunt. Miranda Campbell systematically destroyed every claim Greg's team made, her voice never rising above conversational level as she wielded facts like surgical instruments. "Your Honor," Greg's lawyer argued, "Ms. Morrison has shown a pattern of instability, changing jobs, moving residences, associating with unknown individuals." "You mean finding employment after Mr. Shaw orchestrated her termination?" Miranda interrupted smoothly. "Moving after being evicted from a property owned by Mr. Shaw's donors? As for unknown individuals, Mr. Conway runs a legitimate technology company worth approximately $800 million. Rachel's head snapped toward Leo, who sat in the gallery. $800 million. Furthermore, Miranda continued, producing Rachel's recording device, we have evidence of conspiracy to defraud. Mr. Mark Collins, employed by Mr. Shaw's law firm, attempted to entrap Miss Morrison while she was 7 months pregnant and in distress. She played the recording. Mark's voice filled the courtroom, admitting to the setup, gloating about destroying Rachel. Greg's face went from red to purple to white. Mr. Shaw, Judge Hoffman said coldly, if you bring another frivolous motion before this court, I'll hold you in contempt. Ms. Morrison maintains full custody rights. Furthermore, any attempts to harass her will result in a restraining order. Greg stood abruptly. This isn't over, he hissed at Rachel. Yes, it is, Judge Hoffman said sharply. Bailiff, escort Mr. Shaw out. And how they left the courthouse, Rachel felt lighter than she had in months. Miranda had departed for another meeting, but Leo waited by his car, not the beat-up sedan she'd expected, but a pristine Tesla that probably cost more than her former annual salary. Celebration lunch, he offered. I can't. I have a doctor's appointment. She hesitated. But thank you for everything. Let me drive you. That Honda sounds like it's about to explode. Rachel wanted to refuse, but Emma chose that moment to perform gymnastics on her bladder. Okay, thank you. The drive was comfortable, Leo navigating Manhattan traffic with easy confidence while Rachel tried to process what had happened. She'd won. Greg had been humiliated in court. She should feel victorious. Instead, she felt anxious. He won't stop, she said quietly. Greg doesn't lose. He'll find another way. Then we'll be ready, Leo said simply. At the hospital, Leo waited in the lobby while Rachel went for her checkup. Martinez frowned at the monitors. Your blood pressure is concerning. The stress isn't good for you or the baby. I'm prescribing bed rest. I just started a new job. I can't. You can and you will unless you want to deliver at 32 weeks. Rachel left the appointment fighting tears. She found Leo in the lobby reading a medical journal in Spanish. You speak Spanish? In 6 other languages, he said absently, then noticed her expression. What's wrong? Bed rest. I'm supposed to be on bed rest. Then you'll work from home. We have excellent remote systems. Leo, you can't. I can, and I will. He stood, and for a moment his hand touched her shoulder. Your health comes first. Always. That night, Rachel tried to relax in her Brooklyn apartment, but the walls felt like they were closing in. She pulled out her laptop to work, but contractions kept interrupting. Braxton Hicks, she hoped. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Enjoying your victory? Bianca's voice was sweet poison. It won't last. Greg's already filing new papers. Abandonment of marital property. Dissipation of assets. By the time he's done, you'll owe him money. We're divorced, Rachel said tiredly. Are you? Greg showed me the papers, but funny thing, I couldn't find them filed anywhere. Almost like they don't exist. Bianca laughed. Oops, did I say that out loud? Rachel's blood went cold. If Greg hadn't filed the divorce papers, another contraction hit, this one sharp enough to make her gasp. Oh, is the baby coming? Bianca cooed. Better hope you make it to the hospital. Would be such a shame if something happened while you were all alone. The line went dead. Rachel tried to stand, but another contraction doubled her over. These weren't Braxton Hicks. She called 911, then, without thinking, called Leo. Rachel? I'm in labor. 32 weeks. It's too early. I'm on my way. Which hospital? Mount Sinai. Leo, you don't have to. I'm already in the car. The ambulance arrived first. The EMTs were efficient but concerned. 32 weeks with high blood pressure was dangerous for both mother and baby. Rachel tried to stay calm, but fear consumed her. Emma wasn't ready. She wasn't ready. At the hospital, they rushed her to labor and delivery. Dr. Martinez met her, face grim. We're going to try to stop the contractions, but your blood pressure is dangerously high. If we can't stabilize you both, we'll have to deliver. They pumped her full of medications that made her feel like she was floating. The contractions slowed but didn't stop. Emma's heart rate kept dropping with each one. Please, Rachel begged the universe, please let her be okay. Leo arrived as they were debating emergency surgery. He looked haggard, his usual composure cracked. How is she? He asked Dr. Martinez. Are you the father? I'm a friend. The father isn't involved. Senator Martinez's expression softened slightly. She's stable for now, but stressed. The baby, too. We're monitoring closely. Leo sat in the chair beside Rachel's bed. I'm here, he said quietly. You're not alone. You don't have to stay, Rachel managed through the medication fog. Anna was alone when she died, Leo said, his voice raw. The other driver walked away. The EMT said she was conscious for a few minutes, asking for me. I wasn't there. I couldn't. He stopped, composing himself. You shouldn't be alone. No one should. They sat in silence, machines beeping around them. The contractions gradually spaced out, then stopped. Emma's heart rate stabilized. Good news, Dr. Martinez announced hours later. We've bought you some time. Strict hospital bed rest for at least a week, then we'll reassess. Rachel wanted to cry with relief, but she had no tears left. I'll handle the office, Leo said. Focus on staying pregnant. He left to make calls, and Rachel dozed fitfully. She woke to voices in the hallway, Greg's voice. That's my wife in there. I have rights. Sir, you're not on the approved visitor list, a nurse replied firmly. I don't need to be on a list. We're married. Rachel's monitors started beeping faster. The nurse rushed in. He can't come in here, Rachel said desperately. Please. Security is already on the way, the nurse assured her, but Greg had already pushed past, his legal team and Bianca trailing behind. Bianca wore white again, as if she were already the grieving stepmother. Emergency injunction for temporary custody upon birth, Greg announced, waving papers. Given your mental state and current medical crisis, you're clearly unfit. Get out, Rachel said, her monitor beeping faster. That's my child too, Greg said coldly. I have rights. Rights you signed away with the IVF consent, Rachel shot back. A document you forged, according to our handwriting expert. You're paid liar, you mean? Greg's face darkened. Careful, Rachel. You're nobody now, remember? Nobody wins against me. Bianca pulled out her phone, showing Rachel a photo, Leo entering the Ritz-Carlton with an elegant blonde woman. Look what I found, Bianca sing-songed. Your new boss entering a hotel with another woman. Seems even your rebound has a real girlfriend. You're literally nobody to everyone. Rachel's heart shattered, though she tried not to show it. Leo had someone else. Of course he did. Why would someone like him, wealthy, brilliant, want someone like her? Bianca snapped a selfie with Rachel, visible in the background, pale and connected to monitors. Visiting the surrogate, she captioned it. Can't wait to be a mommy. #blessed. I'm not a surrogate, Rachel said through gritted teeth. You will be once Greg gets custody, Bianca said. Which should be any minute now, right, honey? Dr. Martinez stormed in with security. Everyone out. This is a medical emergency. Leave now or I'll have you arrested. Greg smirked as security escorted him out. See you in court. Nobody. After they left, Rachel broke down completely. She was alone, truly alone. Her daughter might die. Greg would take her if she survived, and even Leo, kind, brilliant Leo, had someone else. She was nobody to everyone. A nurse entered quietly. Mrs. Morrison, there's a man who's been sitting outside the NICU for 18 hours. Security won't let him in because of some court order Mr. Shaw filed, but he won't leave. He just sits there staring through the glass at the empty incubator marked Baby Morrison. Should I call the police? Rachel's breath caught. 18 hours? What does he look like? Tall, brown hair. Looks like he hasn't slept in days. He asked me to give you this. She handed Rachel a note written on hospital stationery. I'm here. You're not nobody. You're everything. L. Rachel stared at William Davenport, her mind struggling to process everything. The kind stranger from the diner was one of the wealthiest men in America. The startup was his empire. The help he'd offered wasn't charity, it was strategy. You've been investigating Greg since before we met, she said. It wasn't a question. For 6 months, William admitted, his voice heavy with something between guilt and determination. His campaign took money from the same shell companies that funded my wife's killer. When I saw what he was doing to you at that gala, he trailed off, jaw clenching. I couldn't stand by and watch another woman be destroyed. So I'm what? Your revenge project? The words came out sharper than Rachel intended, but she was too exhausted to soften them. No, William said firmly, leaning forward in the uncomfortable hospital chair. You're the strongest person I've met in 3 years. You survived what broke me. You're still fighting when everyone would understand if you gave up. Rachel wanted to argue, to push him away, but her phone buzzed insistently. Miranda Campbell was calling for the 5th time. She finally answered. Rachel, thank God! Miranda's usually calm voice was electric with urgency. I've been going through Greg's financial documents for the custody case. You need to see this immediately. Can you get to my office? I'm supposed to be on bed rest. I'll come to you then. This can't wait. Greg's been busy and not in a legal way. Within an hour, despite the medical risks and her doctor's protests, Rachel had checked herself out against medical advice. William's legal team had commandeered an entire floor of the Marriott across from the hospital, transforming it into a war room. Miranda was there with 2 other lawyers, a forensic accountant, and 3 investigators William had hired. The suite's dining table was covered in documents, laptops, and empty coffee cups. Miranda looked like she hadn't slept in days. Greg has been siphoning campaign funds into offshore accounts, Miranda explained, spreading documents across the table. $2 million so far. But here's the smoking gun. He's been using your name on some of these transactions. What? Rachel grabbed the papers, her hands shaking. There was her signature on documents she'd never seen, authorizing transfers she'd never made. The forgeries were good, but not perfect. The pressure points were wrong. The loops in her are too narrow. He's setting you up to take the fall if anyone investigates, William said, studying the documents over her shoulder. Classic narcissistic move, destroy you while protecting himself. But there's more, Miranda continued, pulling out another folder. These divorce papers? She held up the thick stack Greg had been waving around for months. They're theatrical props. Greg never filed them with the court. You're still legally married. Every lawsuit he's filed against you as your ex-husband is fraud. Rachel sank into a chair, the weight of the revelation crushing. He kept me married to maintain spousal privilege. I can't testify against him. Exactly, William said. But he didn't count on one thing, you recording Mark Collins. That conversation proves conspiracy, and Mark isn't protected by spousal privilege. The forensic accountant, a small woman with sharp eyes named Dr. Peterson, pulled up a spreadsheet on her laptop. I've traced the money. It goes through 6 shell companies before landing in accounts in the Cayman Islands. But Greg made a mistake. He used the same routing numbers he used for legitimate campaign expenses in 3 transactions. That creates a paper trail. We have him, Miranda said, but we need to move fast. He's announcing his engagement to Bianca tomorrow night at the Plaza Hotel. 500 donors, national media coverage. Once he publicly commits to her, he'll be desperate enough to do anything. Including harming Rachel, William added quietly. Rachel's hand went to her belly protectively. Emma kicked in response, as if sensing the danger. I've been in contact with the FBI, William revealed. Agent Sarah Collins has been building a case against Greg for months. She just needed the final pieces, which we now have. He made a call, and within 20 minutes, Agent Collins arrived. She was younger than Rachel expected, with an intensity that reminded her of her own law school days. Mrs. Morrison, Agent Collins said, shaking her hand, I've been following your case. What Greg Shaw has done to you is criminal, but it's also part of a larger pattern. He's been taking money from foreign nationals, funneling it through the same accounts. That's federal election fraud. How long have you been investigating him? Rachel asked. 8 months. But we needed someone on the inside, or at least someone with access to his personal documents. The spousal privilege actually works in our favor here. As his wife, you have legal access to financial documents. Miranda pulled out more papers. Speaking of which, I found these in the discovery documents Greg's team accidentally included. She smiled grimly. Text messages between Greg and Bianca that they thought were deleted. Rachel read them, her stomach turning. Greg. Once Rachel's committed to a mental facility, the baby is ours. Bianca. The nursery is already decorated, pink and gold, just like we discussed. Greg. Or Dr. Hoffman will testify she's unstable. Already paid him. Bianca. Once she's nobody, I'll be the only somebody in his life. The baby will call me mom. Greg. After the election, we can make her disappear completely. I know people. He's threatening to have me killed? Rachel's voice was deadly calm. Technically, he's conspiracy to commit assault, false imprisonment, and potentially attempted murder, Agent Collins said. These messages, combined with the financial crimes, mean he's looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison. Williams' investigator, a former NSA analyst named Tom, pulled up security footage on his laptop. There's more. I've been tracking Greg's movements. 3 weeks ago, he met with a known associate of the Marchetti crime family, the same family suspected in my wife's death. The room went silent. William's face had gone pale, his hands clenched so tight his knuckles were white. You think Greg was involved? Rachel asked quietly. No, Williams said, but I think he knows who was, and I think he's been taking money from them for his campaign. Agent Collins stood up. This is bigger than we thought. I need to brief my team. The Plaza Hotel tomorrow night. We'll have agents there. Mrs. Morrison, are you willing to wear a wire? I'm willing to do whatever it takes, Rachel said. No wire, William interrupted. Too dangerous. If Greg suspects anything, he could hurt her. Then how do we get him to confess? Miranda asked. Rachel stood slowly, her back aching from the baby's weight. We don't need him to confess. We just need him to lie publicly about being divorced. That's fraud in front of 500 witnesses. And then? Agent Collins asked. Then we destroy him with the truth, Rachel said, publicly, humiliatingly, and completely. William watched her with something like awe. You're not the same woman from the diner. No, Rachel agreed. That woman thought she was nobody. This woman knows exactly who she is. As the team continued planning, Rachel stepped onto the balcony for air. The city sprawled below, indifferent to her struggles. Somewhere out there, Greg was probably with Bianca, planning their triumph. Tomorrow would change everything. Tomorrow, she would walk into that ballroom and face the man who tried to erase her existence. But this time, she wouldn't be alone. This time, she had evidence, allies, and most importantly, the knowledge that she was somebody, with or without anyone else's validation. Emma kicked again, and Rachel rubbed her belly soothingly. It's okay, baby girl. Mommy's going to make sure you never have to fight this hard just to exist. The morning of the Plaza Gala arrived gray and drizzling, as if the weather itself anticipated the storm about to break. Rachel stood in the hotel suite, surrounded by the detritus of an all-night strategy session. Empty coffee cups, legal documents, and laptop screens filled every surface. She hadn't slept, but adrenaline kept her sharp. The FBI will have 12 agents in the ballroom, Agent Collins briefed the team. 6 in catering uniforms, 4 as guests, 2 at the security desk. Hotel security has been notified to follow our lead. Miranda held up an iPad showing the ballroom layout. Greg's announcing at 8:30. The engagement announcement is scheduled for 8:45. We intercept at 8:40. The media will be in full force, added Tom, Williams' investigator. CNN, Fox, MSNBC, all the major networks. Greg wanted maximum coverage for his big moment. He's about to get it, just not how he imagined. Rachel touched the red dress hanging on the back of the door. She'd chosen it carefully, powerful, elegant, impossible to ignore. The color of blood, of passion, of rebirth. You sure about this? William asked, pulling her aside. Once we walk in there, there's no going back. Greg will try to destroy you completely. He's already tried, Rachel reminded him. The only difference is this time, I'm ready. De Martinez called from the hospital, one last attempt to convince Rachel to return to bed rest. Mrs. Morrison, your blood pressure is concerning. This level of stress could trigger early labor. Then I'll give birth in the Plaza Ballroom, Rachel said. This ends tonight. William's phone buzzed. His technical team had hacked into the Plaza's presentation system. We can override their screens at any time. Your evidence will be displayed on every monitor in the room. What about Bianca? Miranda asked. She's unpredictable. Let her be unpredictable, Rachel said. The more chaos she creates, the better. People need to see who she really is. William's assistant knocked and entered. Sir, there's a woman here. Says she's Mrs. Morrison's mother. Rachel's heart sank. She hadn't spoken to her mother in 2 months, not since she'd sided with Greg. Eleanor Morrison walked in, her usual perfect composure cracked. "Rachel, honey, She stopped, taking in Rachel's obvious exhaustion, her pregnancy, the war room atmosphere. "My God, what has he done to you?" "What he always did, Mom. You just finally noticed." Eleanor's face crumpled. "I got a call from Bianca. She was bragging about becoming Emma's stepmother. She said you'd signed away custody. I knew then. I knew she was lying. You'd never give up your baby. But you believed I was unstable, unfit. Nobody. I was wrong." Eleanor straightened, her patrician spine stiffening. "I was a fool and a coward. But I'm here now. What do you need?" Rachel studied her mother, the woman who taught her to be small, to accommodate, to disappear into a man's shadow. "I need you to be there tonight, to witness what happens when a nobody becomes somebody." "I'll be there," Eleanor promised. The afternoon dissolved into final preparations. Rachel practiced her walk, her words, her expressions in the mirror. She couldn't show weakness, couldn't stumble. Emma performed acrobatics in her womb, responding to her mother's stress. "Easy, baby girl," Rachel whispered. "Just a few more hours." At 6 o'clock, they began to dress. William emerged from his room in a tuxedo that probably cost more than most people's cars. He looked like what he was, a billionaire about to declare war. Miranda helped Rachel with the dress, the red silk flowing over her pregnancy like liquid fire. The stylist William had hired worked magic with her hair and makeup, transforming exhaustion into elegance. "You look like a queen," Miranda said. "I look like a survivor," Rachel corrected. Agent Collins arrived for final instructions. "We've been monitoring Greg's communications. He has no idea what's coming. He's actually texting donors about his brilliant political move of announcing the engagement tonight." "What about the financial evidence?" Rachel asked. "Federal warrant signed an hour ago. The moment he's arrested, we freeze all accounts." William's phone rang. He listened, his face darkening. "Greg just arrived at the plaza. He's telling reporters that his ex-wife might try to crash the event, that she's mentally unstable and obsessed with him." "Perfect, Mama," Rachel said. "He's setting his own trap." At 7:30, they loaded into the anonymous black SUVs William had arranged. Rachel sat between William and Miranda, her hands pressed to her belly, feeling Emma's movements. "Whatever happens," William said quietly, "I want you to know something. These past weeks, watching you fight, seeing your strength, you've made me remember what it's like to believe in justice again." "Save the speeches," Rachel said, but she squeezed his hand. "We have a show to perform." The Plaza Hotel loomed before them, its lights blazing against the dark sky. They could see the reporters lined up outside, the red carpet Greg had arranged for his grand entrance. "Service entrance?" William directed the driver. They slipped in through the kitchen, Agent Collins' people clearing the path. Rachel could hear the party above, laughter, music, the clink of champagne glasses. Greg's world celebrating itself. "He's at the podium," Tom reported, watching his phone's live stream, starting his speech about family values and the sanctity of marriage. Rachel almost laughed. The man who'd destroyed their marriage, lecturing others about sanctity. "Bianca's on stage in a white dress," Tom continued. "She's actually wearing white to announce an engagement while he's still married." "The ring is fake," Williams' investigator added. "I had it analyzed from photos. Cubic zirconia, badly set. He's not even investing in his lie." They waited in the service corridor, listening to Greg's voice echoing through the walls. "Family is the cornerstone of American values. That's why I'm thrilled to share a personal announcement with you tonight." "Now," Agent Collins said. They walked toward the ballroom doors. Rachel's heart pounded so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. Emma kicked frantically. "Together?" William asked, offering his arm. "Together," Rachel agreed. They pushed open the doors just as Greg was saying, "My engagement to the beautiful Bianca Whitfield, the future Mrs. Senator Shaw." The applause was thunderous. Then someone noticed them. A gasp rippled through the crowd like a wave. Cameras swiveled. Greg's face went from triumph to horror in a heartbeat. "Security!" he shouted. "Remove these people immediately!" But William was already walking forward, his presence commanding attention. Rachel kept pace beside him, her red dress aflame against his dark tuxedo, her head high despite the weight of 500 stairs. Actually, William said, his voice carrying across the ballroom without shouting, you might want to hear what we have to say. The security guards looked confused, torn between Greg's orders and the FBI badges being discreetly shown by agents throughout the room. Ladies and gentlemen, William continued, reaching the front of the room, I'm William Davenport. You might remember me from before I disappeared from public life. I'm here tonight because you're about to donate money to a criminal. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Reporters pushed forward, sensing the story of the year. This is ridiculous, Greg sputtered. This man is clearly disturbed, and that woman, he pointed at Rachel, is my mentally unstable ex-wife who can't accept our divorce. Rachel stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. That's interesting, Greg. Show them the divorce decree. Show them the final papers. Greg's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear. The paperwork is filed, Greg insisted. This is harassment. Then you won't mind if we check? William asked. On cue, the ballroom screens came alive. The courthouse database appeared, searchable by anyone. William's team typed in Greg and Rachel's names. Status, married. The crowd gasped. That's a mistake, Greg said desperately. A clerical error. No, Rachel said, stepping into the spotlight. It's fraud. You never filed the papers, Greg. Every lawsuit you've filed against me as my ex-husband, every claim you've made to these people about being divorced, it's all a lie. Bianca's scream pierced the air. What do you mean we're not engaged? The screens changed again. Text messages filled the display. The crowd read in horrified silence as Greg and Bianca planned Rachel's destruction, discussed stealing her baby, joked about making her nobody. Then came the financial documents, the offshore accounts, the embezzled millions. Agent Collins stepped forward, her badge raised. Gregory Shaw, you're under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. The room exploded into chaos, but Rachel stood perfectly still in the eye of the storm, watching her ex-husband's world collapse. In the midst of the chaos, William took the microphone. The room gradually quieted, everyone eager to hear what the reclusive billionaire would say next. 3 years ago, I lost everything, William said, his voice carrying raw honesty. My wife, my unborn child, my faith in justice. I disappeared because I thought nothing mattered anymore. He turned to Rachel, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. Then I met this woman. Not as William Davenport, but as Leo, a nobody in a diner. She was 7 months pregnant, sleeping in her car, abandoned by everyone who should have protected her. And she was still fighting. The room was completely silent now. Even the reporters had stopped taking photos. Rachel Morrison was called nobody by the man who vowed to cherish her, William continued, but she's not nobody. She's the strongest person I've ever met. She's brilliant, determined, and fierce in her love for her unborn child. He walked to where Rachel stood, her hands pressed to her belly where the baby kicked frantically. She survived what would break most people. She protected herself when no one else would. She fought for justice when the entire system was against her. William dropped to one knee. The crowd gasped. Bianca, who had recovered from her faint, screamed, "No." Rachel Morrison, William said, pulling out a small velvet box. You were never nobody. You're the woman who reminded me that life is worth living. You're the mother who would face down armies for her child. You're the fighter who brought down corruption with wisdom and courage. He opened the box, revealing a stunning diamond ring. Real, unlike Bianca's fake monstrosity. Will you marry me? Every eye in the room fixed on Rachel. The cameras rolled. The world waited. Rachel looked down at William, this complicated, brilliant man who'd seen her at her lowest and still saw her as somebody. Her daughter kicked again, as if voting yes. But Rachel had learned to value herself more than any man's validation. William, she said clearly, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom, please stand up. He did, confusion flickering across his face. Ask me again, Rachel said, when I'm not in the middle of destroying my ex-husband. She gestured to where Greg stood in handcuffs. I want to say yes to you, not to prove a point to him. The room held its breath. Rachel continued, I've been somebody's wife. I've been nobody's victim. Now I need to be my own somebody before I can be yours. William's face broke into the most genuine smile she'd ever seen from him. Fair enough, he said, pocketing the ring. I'll wait. Good, Rachel said. Then she took the microphone from him. Greg called me nobody. She addressed the room, her voice strong and clear. Tonight, I'm the woman who ended his career. She pulled legal documents from her purse, the custody papers Miranda had prepared, the civil suit for damages. She had them served to Greg right there, in front of everyone. Tomorrow, Rachel continued, I'll be whoever I choose to be, and that's not nobody, that's everything. The ballroom erupted in applause, not the polite golf claps of society events, but genuine, thunderous approval. These people had witnessed something real, something raw, something extraordinary. As the FBI led Greg away, he turned back one last time. You're still nobody, Rachel, he shouted. Nobody will remember you. Rachel smiled. They'll remember me as the woman who brought you down. That's somebody enough for me. Bianca, mascara streaming down her face, stumbled toward Rachel. This is all your fault. I'm pregnant. What am I supposed to do now? The room gasped again. Even Greg looked shocked from where he stood in custody. Rachel studied the woman who'd tormented her for months. 6 months from now, when you're scared and alone and everyone calls you nobody, call me. I'll tell you how to survive it. But right now, figure out how to be somebody on your own. She turned to William. Take me to the hospital. I need to check on my daughter. As they walked out together, neither possessive nor possessed, but as equals, the Wall Street Journal's photographer captured the moment that would make tomorrow's front page. Rachel Morrison, head high, walking toward her future, while her past was led away in handcuffs. The Manhattan office of Morrison Legal Aid Foundation hummed with purpose. Rachel signed the last document establishing the nonprofit, funded by the $5 million settlement from her civil suit against Greg. The foundation would provide free legal services to women facing custody battles with abusive ex-partners. Her daughter Emma, now 6 months old and healthy, gurgled happily in her baby carrier. She had Rachel's eyes and, unfortunately, Greg's stubborn chin, though Rachel was determined that would be the only thing she inherited from him. The door opened, and her assistant announced, Morrison, Bianca Whitfield is here. Rachel had been expecting this. Send her in. Bianca looked nothing like the beauty queen who'd tormented Rachel. 6 months pregnant, wearing a simple maternity dress from Target, her roots showing, she was a shadow of her former self. I have nothing, Bianca said without preamble. Greg's assets were seized. His family won't acknowledge me. I'm nobody now. She laughed bitterly. I guess you're enjoying this. I'm not, Rachel said simply. Sit down. Would you like some water? Bianca sat carefully, her hand on her belly. Why are you being nice to me? Because I remember what it feels like, Rachel said, and because your baby doesn't deserve to suffer for your mistakes. She pulled out a file. I've arranged for you to receive services through the foundation. Free legal help for custody arrangements with Greg, who'll be in prison for 15 years, by the way. There's also information about housing assistance and job training programs. Bianca stared at the papers, tears falling. I was horrible to you. Yes, you were. I posted those videos, said those things. Yes, you did. So why help me? Rachel looked at Emma, who was reaching for her mother's hair. Because somebody has to break the cycle. Your child deserves a mother who's his somebody, even if that somebody needs help finding her way. Bianca broke down completely. Through her sobs, she managed, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I know, Rachel said. Now stop crying and start becoming somebody worth respecting. Your baby needs you to be strong. As Bianca left with the resources she needed, Rachel felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Forgiveness wasn't about Bianca. It was about Rachel's freedom from the past. That evening, Rachel stood in her new law office, the one she'd built from scratch with her own money, her own effort, her own determination. The walls held her degrees, her awards, and a photo from the Plaza Hotel that night, not of Greg's arrest, but of her walking away with her head held high. William knocked on the doorframe. You ready? They had dinner plans, their first official date. They'd been taking things slow, building a friendship first, letting Rachel establish her independence. William had waited patiently, never pushing, always supporting. Almost, Rachel said, gathering Emma's diaper bag. You know, William said, the offer still stands. He'd proposed twice more in the past 6 months, both times with humor, both times accepting her, not yet with grace. I know, Rachel said. Ask Memes after dinner. His eyes lit up. Really? Maybe, she teased. You'll have to wait and see. The rooftop restaurant overlooked the city where Rachel had been broken and reborn. Emma slept peacefully in her carrier beside the table, unconscious of the momentous conversation happening above her head. You've changed my life, William said, raising his wine glass to toast Rachel's water. She was still nursing. But more importantly, you've changed your own. We both have, Rachel said. You're not hiding anymore. Your company went public last month. You're living again, because you showed me how. He reached across the table, taking her hand. Rachel Morrison, you were somebody's wife. Then you were nobody's victim. Now you're everybody's inspiration. The foundation has helped 50 women already. Your story has changed lives. It's not about my story anymore, Rachel said. It's about theirs. William stood, and for the fourth time, he dropped to one knee. The restaurant fell silent, again. This time, though, Rachel laughed. You really can't help yourself with the public proposals, can you? I want the world to know, William said simply. I want everyone to see that the woman who was called nobody is actually everything. He pulled out the ring, the same one from the Plaza Hotel. Rachel Morrison, will you marry me? Not to prove anything to anyone, not to show Greg or Bianca or the world anything except this. I love you. I love your strength, your kindness, your fierce protection of those you love. I love how you've become your own somebody. Will you let me be somebody with you? Rachel looked at him, this brilliant, complicated man who'd waited patiently while she rebuilt herself, who'd supported without controlling, helped without diminishing her accomplishments. William, she said, I need you to understand something. He stayed on his knee, waiting. I'm saying yes to you, not to being Mrs. Davenport. I'll keep my name. I'll keep my practice. I'll be your partner, not your accessory. I wouldn't have it any other way. And Emma comes first, always. Always, he agreed immediately. And you have to let me write the prenuptial agreement. He laughed, a rich, warm sound. I'd be disappointed if you didn't. Then yes, Rachel said. Yes, I'll marry you. The restaurant erupted in applause as William slipped the ring on her finger. A perfect fit, just as they'd become perfect fits for each other. Two broken people who'd helped each other heal. 1 year later, at their wedding, Rachel's vows brought tears to even the most cynical eyes. I was somebody's wife, defined only by my relationship to him. Then I was nobody, defined by his absence. But in that nothingness I found myself. I became somebody who chose herself first, and that made all the difference. Now I choose to be somebody with you, not for you. I choose to be your partner, your equal, your wife, but always, always my own somebody first. Emma toddled down the aisle as Flower Girl, throwing petals with the same determination her mother had shown throwing off the chains of her past. The Wall Street Journal ran a feature on their wedding with the headline, The Woman Who Refused to Be Nobody. Rachel Morrison's journey from humiliation to triumph. But Rachel's favorite moment wasn't in any newspaper. It was later that evening when she stood with William on their balcony, Emma asleep in her arms, looking out at the city that had tried to break her. Any regrets? William asked. None, Rachel said. Every terrible thing led to this moment. Even Greg? Especially Greg. He taught me the difference between being somebody's wife and being my own somebody. And what's the difference? Rachel smiled, thinking of all the women her foundation would help, all the daughters who would grow up knowing their mothers were fighters, all the futures that would be different because one woman refused to be nobody. Everything, she said. The difference is everything. And in that moment, with her daughter in her arms and her partner by her side, Rachel Morrison knew the truth. She had never been nobody. She had always been somebody. She just had to survive, losing everything to find out who that somebody was. The city lights twinkled below, each one representing a life, a story, a somebody fighting to be seen. Rachel had been one of those lights, flickering but never extinguishing, and now she burned bright enough to light the way for others. She was Rachel Morrison. She was a mother, a lawyer, a survivor, a wife by choice rather than default. She was somebody who had chosen herself first, and that had made all the difference. That was everything.